Hi everyone, welcome if you're new to the channel. Thank you for checking this out. So, there's a few caveats I want to make in this one, a few, I guess, disclaimers. What I'm going to be talking about is for educational purposes. It's not intended to glorify in any way, shape, or form. Um, and when we're talking about crime, especially homicide, um, no statistics will ever be of any comfort to any victim. That goes without saying. The safest places in the world, if someone's killed, that's still devastating for the family. So that's something that has to be said. So in no way am I trying to downplay crime that does exist. Um, the statistics that I'm going to be quoting are some of the most recently available. But some of the years in question now go back 4 or 5 years, so the statistics may be somewhat different since then, but they are the most recent figures available via the Wikipedia article entitled Countries by Intentional Homicide Rate, and I'll put a link in the video. Um, Also, I'm focusing primarily on homicide simply because when we think of crime, it is one of the worst. It's up there near the top among the most heinous crimes you could think of. Taking a human life, it's way up there. In the case of England and Wales, the law is different in different countries, but there will be manslaughter cases that are not counted in the official homicide rate, and some would argue they should be. So that's something to consider. Um, But I'm making this because perhaps to provide a little bit of balance, because often when I talk about crime and justice, it's from a very critical and negative angle with basis. I mean, I stand by everything I've said. I do think that our justice establishment is tone deaf, and I do think we have some serious social problems in this country. Um, and what's happening in Ballymena right now in County Antrim, I'm totally disgusted by it, and I'm disgusted by the excuses being made for the rioters. It makes no sense that they are ostensibly standing up for the victims of sexual assault, and yet they're literally burning children from their homes. I think they're opportunistic thugs, and I support the police service of Northern Ireland 100%. And as someone pointed out on my video about this, apologies, I can't remember your name off the top of your username off the top of my head, but you have to consider if the alleged rapists were local, would there be this rioting going on? I don't think there would. There might still be anger, but I definitely think there's a racist component. Um, I mean, now every Romanian in Northern Ireland is under threat, so that's a disgrace. And I just have no patience with the mentality that you're somehow on the side of justice and morality by burning families out of their home, by mindless thuggery. It's reprehensible. So yeah, that's something I wanted to put in passing. I was watching the Johnny Depp mob film last night, Black Mass, and it's a violent film that was set in the south side of Boston in the 1970s and 80s. Um, and yeah, it just got me on the research about this. I was curious as to how does my city rank. I was just wondering, and this is perhaps what prompted me to make the video. Sunderland. In the local authority area, we have around 300,000 people. Now, there's a site called Varbase, but it looks like a reputable site. They seem to be basing the figures on Home Office statistics, and it's pretty comprehensive, and I will put a link to that. This is astonishing. In the year ending September 2023, that is September 22 to September 23, how many murders did this city have? Bear in mind, Sunderland has about 300,000 people in the authority. One, a single murder. Now, I'm not even sure which case that was. I know of, it may even be a case there was a man attacked by an American bully at cell. I'm not sure if that was prosecuted as a murder because he'd been attacked by the other guy. I don't know what that was prosecuted as, but one single homicide in the city in a year. Now, it will vary. I know there's been other years where there's been a few, but I think it's an interesting case study. That means Sunderland is the 10th safest metropolitan district in England and Wales out of 36. one single murder. If you look at some smaller American cities, they go into dozens, and that would be considered successful. So when we look at things in that way, and I checked out some other British cities just for a sort of comparison, even big cities, Birmingham, over 1 million people in Birmingham. The figure was 19. 19 murders in a city of 1 million people, more than 1 million people. Now, again, of course, this doesn't factor in sexual offences, violent assault. We do have problems with job culture in this country. We do have problems with people cannot handle their alcohol. We do have problems with youth crime. I'm not downplaying or trivialising any of that. All that sort of stuff can really ruin the fabric of life. But I do think that the looking at the homicide rate is put things into context. And I'm going to read out some of the results from that Wikipedia list. And again, yeah, it's Wikipedia, but it will be based on available national statistics. And the thing about murder, it's not something that's easily embellished. You could do that with some other crimes. Murder is quite a palpable crime. There's a body, um, and there should be a trial. That isn't always the case, but it's something that's relatively easy to gauge, especially in the UK. Um, in countries that have exceptionally high rates, it might be harder, and the true figure might be even higher. But without further ado, um, the UK, specifically England and Wales, we rank 141st out of 200 countries. So we're well in the bottom half. Not at the very bottom, but well in that second half. 141 out of around 200 countries and territories that were analysed. Um, Again, it's no comfort to those who are affected by this, and I would never ever downplay that. But I do think sometimes, before I get further into these statistics, I do think sometimes the media would do well to promote the positive a bit more, promote reductions in crime where it does happen. I'm not saying they shouldn't promote serious crime. There absolutely should be a debate about justice, but I do think sometimes the press are guilty of focusing more on negative than positive generally. And I think when it comes to crime, probably the fear of crime is higher than crime itself. Now, having said that, if you're living in a tough inner city area, the chances of being a victim of crime are going to be quite high. There'll be some places where theft is higher than others. There will be some places where there's serious drug problems or the risk of violent assault is quite serious. But again, homicide rates in this country, basically the chances of, to put it bluntly, being murdered in Britain are extremely low. That has to be taken into consideration. So what's at the very top? It may not be what people expect. They might think countries like Brazil and Venezuela have a reputation. Actually, the very top, according to this list, Turks and Caicos Islands. I'm not sure if that's fully independent or if it's got some autonomy. But anyway, it's at the very top. And the way they gauge these things is the homicide rate per 100,000 people. That means for every 100,000 people, how many murders are there? And this is exceptionally high, 76.582 in the year 2022. Um, that's followed by the US Virgin Islands. Jamaica is third. Ecuador is fourth. Now, the situation in Ecuador has got definitely worse. It used to be relatively safe by South American standards, but it's now rocketed up. It's got a serious problem. South Africa, won't surprise anyone, is next. Haiti, in fact, I'm surprised Haiti isn't at the top, but still very high. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, Lesotho, St. Lucia, and Honduras. Those are the countries that are at the very, very top. Now, the interesting thing there is, or the notable thing, is almost all of them, with the exception of South Africa and Lesotho, are in the Caribbean region, the Latin America and Caribbean region. That is a part of the world that has a very serious problem with violent crime. Um, and there must be immense public frustration with that. I mean, in the case of Haiti, it's essentially a war zone. That's another thing. I've deliberately not looked at countries that have wars going on. For example, Sudan, Palestine is listed there. I haven't taken that into consideration because it's going to be a lot higher now. Obviously, in that when you have an armed conflict going on or a genocide, if If you take it that way, then that's obviously different from conventional homicide rates, i.e., in peacetime. Although some parts of the world are so violent that their homicide rate, it may as well be a war zone. But anyway, I haven't looked at countries like Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen for that reason. Although I would say that civil war can definitely cause instability in a country, which in turn affects law enforcement, which in turn enables criminality. Certainly, when the Iraq War went on in the 2000s, the crime rates rose because of the general situation of instability. It was an opportunity for criminals. Now, I've looked at the United States. This is interesting because often there's many comparisons made between the US and the UK. America is a lot more dangerous, although it's safer than some countries in South and Central America. But certainly among Western countries, it's pretty high. It ranks 65th, and it had a homicide rate of 5.763. This is per 100,000 in 2023, with almost 20,000 homicides in the United States of America. And I'm going to just highlight some other cases just to underline this point. Canada, significantly higher than England and Wales. Canada, it's a country that generally has a good reputation, but it's actually significantly more dangerous when it comes to homicides than most European countries, although better than the United States. It's 2.273, it ranks 110th, and it recorded 874 homicides in 2022. Canada has a smaller population than the UK, but had more homicides, so that's significant. Like I say, the UK, that is England and Wales, ranks in at 141st, 1.148, 684 homicides in 2021. That's still lives, it's still people's families affected, but that's in a population in England and Wales of around over 60 million in England and Wales. So Northern Ireland and Scotland, well, Northern Ireland ranks at 132, so it's above England and Wales. It's 1.413. There are 27 homicides in the year 2022 in Northern Ireland, which has a population of about 2 million. So it's above England and Wales, so it's the highest rate within the United Kingdom. Scotland, surprisingly enough, is well below England and Wales. It ranks at 155th, 0.967 in 2021. And I should have got the figure for how many homicides there were, but that's actually the lowest of the four nations. I say I'm surprised, because Scotland does have a serious problem with drugs and drink, and you'd think that would factor into it, but not necessarily. Um, so looking at some other examples, India is roughly halfway down the list. India has 2.832. It recorded 40,130 murders in 2022, but has the world's biggest population. France ranked at 137th, so it's above both Northern Ireland and actually any of the home nations in the UK. France is 1.335, 887 homicides in 2023. That's actually the highest rate among big European countries, Western European countries. Um, Germany ranked at 162nd. It's fairly safe. It recorded 0.823, 686 homicides in 2022, which actually is almost exactly the same as England and Wales, but it's a bigger population, therefore it's a lower rate. Um, Looking at some other examples. Let's see here. So near the bottom of the list, we have Japan. It's famously a pretty safe country. It ranks at 192nd, 0.233, 289 homicides in 2022, but it has a big population, about 125 million people. So that's an extreme. Japan has a reputation for safety. Apparently, I don't know if it's true, but you can leave a wallet in a restaurant in Tokyo, come back a few hours later, and it will still be there. It's possible. Where else is very, very low on the list? Oman, 194th. It is 0.139. It recorded 7 homicides in 2023. Singapore, 0.069. It has around 6 million people. It recorded 4 homicides in 2023. That's extremely low. So Singapore is a very safe country. Um, and some territories zero murders, none. Although, to be fair, they are very small. The Holy See, not surprisingly, Tuvalu, San Marino, St. Helena, the Isle of Man, Montserrat, and Monaco. Not a single homicide in those territories, though some of them are autonomous and not fully independent. But that puts things in context again. Around 200 countries in the world, England and Wales is 141st. All the four nations of the UK are well into the bottom half. That is the safer half. Now, again, I'm not trying to send out the message that there is no problems in this country and murder is murder. You know, it will always be devastating for the victim's family. But sometimes I do think our press, especially the tabloid press, do scaremonger a bit. I'm hardline on crime. I do think there's a lot of things that have to improve with our justice system. But I welcome the fact that Britain really is relatively safe. Now, you won't feel that way if you're in Ballymena right now or throughout England last summer, but those are situations that are brought about by a combination of factors: frustration at government policies, misinformation, opportunism. Um, I don't think they necessarily point to an unsafe situation. The risk of terrorism in the UK, we're not alien to terrorism. We have had both jihadist and far right terrorism in this country. But again, you can't compare the situation in the UK to certain other parts of the world. You know, you just can't. So I want people to take, if you're in the UK, I want you to take hopefully something positive from this. It's if we put things in context, Britain really isn't that dangerous. Yes, we're worse in some places. Um, by the way, other countries that round off the very bottom are South Korea, Australia, China, Italy, Indonesia, Ireland, Spain, and the Netherlands. They're all below the UK. But France is above the UK, the United States is above the UK, Canada is above the UK, India is above the UK, and we are well on the bottom half of that graph. I'll put a link to. I'll also put a link to that Firebase site. I haven't heard of it before, but it's very comprehensive, and I think it's a trustworthy source. Um, Let me know your thoughts, but you know, I think this is welcome. Really, the United Kingdom is a relatively safe country. Even London, you know, we always hear about knife crime. Apparently, London actually is proportionally not that bad, and some cities in the Midlands are just as bad as London. Glasgow traditionally has had a problem with knife gangs. Again, in London, you know, we hear cases of young people being stabbed. It's awful, but you have to remember London's got 9 million people. A city that big is going to have homicides. It's just reality. That doesn't mean that something shouldn't be done about the scourge of youth crime and knife crime and so on. But again, you know, you compare London to somewhere like San Pedro Sula in Honduras. There's just no comparison. And most American cities, smaller cities such as Baltimore, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, St. Louis, they're all smaller than London, yet they're significantly more dangerous. So, yeah, there's a problem, but it is important to put things in context. I really do believe that, because I think the fear of crime helps no one. Sometimes it's justified if you're living in a rough area, but overall, like I said, the chances of being a murder victim in Britain are extremely low. Other problems like violent assault, sexual offences are obviously higher, but even there, they probably don't compare to other parts of the world. So I just think this isn't about trivializing anything. It's not about downplaying anything. It's about putting things in context. Let me know your thoughts.